morning, everyone. It is Sunday, September 24th, 2017, and this is your fun fact of the day. The people of Israel, again, did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. So the Lord gave them into the hands of the Philistines for 40 years. And thus we have the stage set for the beginning of our story today in Judges chapters 13 through 16. Well, there was a man named Manoah from the tribe of Dan. He and his wife were visited by an angel of the Lord. She was visited first, and they had a later encounter with both of them. And this angel told them, "Sure, you've had no kids yet, but you will conceive and you will bear a son. While you're pregnant, you will eat nothing that is unclean. You will drink nothing that is alcoholic. And eat nothing from the vine, really, at all. And when he is born, you will also make sure he doesn't ever have any alcohol or eat anything unclean, and that he never cuts his hair or shaves his head, as some interpretations will say." This is referred to as a Nazirite vow for this boy that they would have, was going to be a Nazirite. And that this boy that they would give birth to would deliver Israel from the Philistines. Manoah and his wife had these instructions. There was a proof as far as they brought food to this angel and it was consumed by fire, so they understood this was God's power. Well, Manoah was actually afraid that it's like, oh, we've seen God, we're going to die. Look, if God wanted us dead, he wouldn't have taken our offering. He wouldn't have shown us favor. He wouldn't promise us a son just to kill us. God did not kill Manoah and his wife. No, she conceived, bore a son, and thus was born Samson. Samson grows, takes a wife from one of the Philistines. So he has a woman who's technically foreign, I suppose, even though she's living in the land, I guess. And while he's at his wedding, he tests some of his guests out with a riddle, with a pretty high price attached, saying, if you can answer this riddle, I will pay you 30 garments. And if you can't answer me this riddle in 7 days, then you pay me 30 garments. So the Philistine men ask, okay, Samson, what's your riddle? They can't get the riddle across several days, so they threaten Samson's wife, saying, hey, if you don't get this answer from Samson, we're going to kill you and your father. We're going to burn you and your house down with you inside. So Samson's wife pleads and entreats and begs, and finally Samson reveals it to her on the 7th day. She goes and tells them, and Samson's like, all right, what's the answer? And they're like, we got the answer. And Samson correctly deduces or assumes, just somehow says, well, you wouldn't have got that if you hadn't been cheating with my wife. So he kills all 30 of these men. And then at some point in this timeline, Samson's father-in-law gives Samson's wife to the Philistine man who was Samson's best man at his wedding. The Bible actually specifies that one. Yeah. So Samson comes in from some time away and says, hey, I'm going to go enjoy some time with my wife. Father-in-law won't let him see his wife. And Samson's like, what are you doing? He's like, well, I actually thought you hated my daughter. I thought you hated your wife, so I gave her to your friend, you know, your best man, the Philistine. And Samson's like, basically declares his innocence before he retaliates. His retaliation is to take 300 foxes that he went and caught on his own. That's already impressive in itself. Ties them up by pairs, tail to tail, and then puts a torch on each pair of tails and lets them run through the Philistine fields, setting fire to the crops. In response, the Philistine men burn Samson's wife and his father-in-law. So Samson promises a single retaliation in response to the Philistines' continued abridgments of him. Says he will do one thing against them and then he'll quit. Well, some Philistine men go and besiege or make camp against a town in Israel. And they say, hey, we want Samson. Men of the town go to Samson and say, hey, you need to come back with us. Samson agrees. They get to the town where the Philistine men are, and Samson, who was bound with some rope at this point, basically the ropes just melted off of him with his strength. The Bible is quoted as having said, the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him. That's where he get his strength from. He found the jawbone of a donkey and proceeded to murder 1,000 Philistine men that day. That'd be exhausting. I'd be really tired from that. Sometime later, Samson finds a woman from the valley of Sorek. Her name is Delilah. She's a Philistine woman, and he loves her, but she was also loyal to the Philistines. So some Philistines continuously entreat her. Find out what the secret to his strength is. Find out how we can make him weak like any other man. They try fresh bowstrings. They try unused ropes. They try braiding Samson's hair. All these were things that Samson had told his wife, and she's like, oh, if you loved me, you'd tell me the source of your strength. And Samson was basically told to never ever tell anyone the source of his strength. So he's got this woman who wants to know. So he keeps telling her lies, effectively. And Delilah keeps pressing and begging until finally Samson reveals, I've never had my head shaved. If my head is shaved, I will lose all my strength. I'll be like any other average Joe. When this happens, she convinces him to fall asleep on her lap. She brings in the guy shaves his head, strength of the Lord leaves him. Philistine men come in, bind him, blind him, put him to work on a threshing floor, just pushing a millstone. Well, after some time, some Philistine lords have a feast. Thousands of people are in this house having this feast, and they're like, hey, we need some entertainment. Bring Samson! He'll be great entertainment for us. They bring him in because he's blind. They have to lead him, and he says, okay, put me against the pillars that the house rests on so I know where I am, effectively. And they chain him to the pillars that the house is supported by. The room was full of 3,000 people. 3,000 Philistines. Now, while Samson was working at the mill, his hair grew back. Sometime later, his hair is back, and while he's braced against these pillars in the house, Samson pleads, God, please remember me just one more time, that I may have vengeance on the Philistines. Samson grasped these 2 pillars the house rested on. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him once more, and he pushed all his weight into them, took the pillars down, took the entire house down, and killed everyone inside, himself included. Philistines were at pretty heavy losses, because these were probably some pretty important guests at this place. If the house was big enough to house 3,000 people, you can bet some important people were there, and everyone inside died. So Samson judged Israel with this last act of his, and his brothers and his family came and took him and brought him and gave him a proper burial, as he deserved. Other parts of the stories that we kind of skipped over because they're a little bit standalone pieces of the anecdote include when the lion rushed him and he ripped it in half with his bare hands. That also happened. There was God opening a spring for Samson when he thought he was going to die after slaying 1,000 Philistine men by hand. I could understand you could die of thirst after that. You're probably pretty thirsty. There was a time when some Philistines came to get him at night, and then he pulled up the gates and the posts the gates were on of an entire city and just walks away with them, brings them up to a hill and leaves them there. Samson was a man of marvelous strength that was probably pretty easily fooled, because Delilah keeps entreating him. So, Samson, what's the secret to your strength? And then it would happen. And he never seemed to catch on. She's trying to trick me. Everything that I tell her happens to me. And on the news today is National Cherries Jubilee Day. Never had it. Probably a dessert. And National Punctuation Day. Period. Hope you've enjoyed this fun fact of the day. See you tomorrow.